And finally, I just want to point out one of the most beautiful verses in all of Scripture. If you've lost somebody dear, indeed as I have, I lost a wife to cancer at the age of 48, 15 years ago or so now. And a verse like this just keeps you going. Jesus must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be destroyed is death. My friends, evolution makes death natural. Old earth makes death natural. If death becomes natural for you, if God is the author of death, not we through our fall into sin, it undermines the whole of Christianity. I pray that that never happened to any of us. Well, if this is a lecture you'd kind of like to see again, it's available. As Lucy, she's no lady. Did we have any product sent here, or do we have anything here to purchase? You do have some, okay. Okay, so there's one copy of this. It's probably about all you'd sell anyway after this lecture. But I have one on the hearing ear and the seeing eye that talks about the marvelous complexity of the ear and the eye that the Lord has given us to hear and read His Word. I have one on the Scopes trial, comparing it with the movie Inherit the Wind. I thought it had a cute title, Inherently Wind, a Hollywood history of the Scopes trial. And we sell them as a packet at AIG. In fact, you can get them for less than 40. I think they're 39 now. We've got to get rid of them somehow. And then our magazine. How many get our magazine, Answers Magazine? Good. I like to see so many. The rest of you, well, we'll be locking the doors, and you're going to have to agree to buy it before you leave. Well, if there are any questions, or we just take a break now, how should we handle this?
If they didn't have any real bones for the hands and for the feet, how can they draw all these conclusions about the hands and the feet?
Okay, when you look at Lucy, you see like a metacarpal bone. That's about it for the hands and really nothing for the feet. But Lucy is one specimen. There's at least 12 or 15 specimens nowadays of Australopithecus afarensis. None of the others are as complete as Lucy, which was 40% complete. But when you look at these other specimens, they include bones, for example, that Lucy doesn't have. So if you kind of pool everything together, I think we have a pretty good idea of how she was put together, or this creature was put together. I think we have enough information now from all of the specimens that have been found. We certainly have toe bones, we certainly have finger bones, to know that we have basically something very much like a pygmy chimp here. And that's how we're going to portray her in the museum. But unlike a secular museum, we're actually going to offer references for all of our decisions. In other words, you'll be able to get a reference in the scientific literature why we put the locking knuckles, why we got her walking on her knuckles. You don't see that in scientific museums, but you will in our creation museum. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering, do they have any other examples of those hip bones you got stepped on?
I don't know if we have, innominates that are as complete as that particular one. That's what we call that one bone, which is kind of interesting. You see, the only bone in the body doesn't have a name. It's called the innominate, which is Latin for no name. All over the world, it's known as the innominate. No name. I'm not aware of, whether they just have fragmentary evidence, but certainly from this hip and from everything else we see, like the up-tilted glenoid fossa, suspensory adapted upper limbs, everything about this creature just screams the trees. Yeah?
Is it not true that Lucy's bones were found in different locations, even miles apart, maybe different strata?
Yeah, you hear this, that like one of the knee bones was found some distance away. That's really another specimen, and it hasn't been really incorporated into Lucy. What I showed you here are the bones that were reasonably associated with one another that leave me satisfied they represent one individual. But there have been other bones found, and I think sometimes there's a confusion whether a bone found some distance away is being claimed as being part of the Lucy group, I mean that very specimen, or simply representing A. afarensis, which would be fair. But of course, to argue it was actually part of this specimen, that would not be, and I don't think that's been done. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times that you thought that this is probably a male specimen rather than a female. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, the pelvis is one of the distinguishing differences between a male and a female. There's a pelvis type we call androgynous. It's very male-like. and then there's a pelvis that's more like the female pelvis. And males can't give birth to young because of the shape of their pelvis. It's more of a funnel shape, and females have a more of an open cone, you know, with a broad opening. It's still a tight fit, as you'll see in the next lecture. In fact, it's too tight, the baby's head won't fit through it. Pretty much brings the whole story to an end. But because of the shape of the hip, some have suggested it could have possibly been a male. Am I saying it is a male? No, I don't think we have probably good enough evidence to make a final decision on that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Were Lucy's bones found in the same formation as the apelike footprints?
Well, they would argue that the dating that's been done shows them to be the same date, you know, and as you know, you can't date the fossil. There's nothing in Lucy's fossil that's datable because there's no carbon in it. It's rock, and there's no way to date a fossil that has become rock. And it's in sedimentary strata, and there's no way to date sedimentary strata. You're beginning to see a problem here. You can't date fossils, and you can't date the kind of strata that fossils are typically found in, sedimentary strata. The reason is sedimentary strata, and I don't think this is going to be a huge shock to you, is made of sediment. And sediment can be anything from gravel-like particles down to face powder-like particles that have settled out of water. And where did these particles come from? Well, the whole drainage bed to this area. And so this particle here, face powder-sized particle, might have come from Farmer Brown's West 40. And this one over here in the Mississippi River Delta might have come from Itasca State Park. It has two widely different sources. So there's no way to date an assemblage of particles that make up sedimentary rock. What is dated is igneous rock. And you might wonder, well, how does dating igneous rock help you? Well, it's the only thing that's datable by like uranium, thorium, lead, potassium, argon, etc. And what they do is they date lava fills that have flown in between the layers of the rock. We call them sills. And they think they have the date for the sill, and they interpret that for the fossil. Also, a lot of fossils are dated not by any radiometric dating, but just by general assumptions of the age of the strata based on other fossils found in it. So it gets to be pretty circular. You know how old the fossil is, therefore you know how old the strata is. You know how old the strata is, you know how old the fossil. And that's called an index fossil. That's basically what they were doing with Basil Cook's pig teeth. He knows how old the pig tooth is, therefore he knows how old the strata is. He knows how old the strata is because he knows how old the pig tooth is. Radiometric dating is, I think the top is beginning to just fall off from it. I've got a CD here that I actually got from a radio host here in the Denver area. What's his name yet? Don? Here it is. Enyart, yeah, Bob Enyart. And he had challenged the folks that found that dinosaur that had the marrow, the soft marrow in it, Mary Schweitzer and Jack Horner. They're in the Colorado area here. And Bob Enyart had worked up a total of $20,000 to give to Schweitzer and Horner to use in any way they see fit at their museum or in their research if they would just allow either the marrow or a piece of the bone to be carbon dated. And he basically, Horner told him, you couldn't come up with enough money for me to let you date it. And you know why, because he knows it's perfectly datable with radiocarbon. Unquestionably datable with radiocarbon. And they're willing to give all the money. I mean, would 40,000, would 80,000, I mean, what would it take? So far he's hanging tough, he's not going to let you date his fossil. And he finally conceded that the reason he wouldn't is you'd use it against him. He knows it's datable with radiocarbon. And radiocarbon should date things, what? At the most? 50 with the newest techniques, possibly up to 100,000. But assuming there was a specimen that old. And these specimens are supposed to be like 70 million years old. It should be as cold could be for radiocarbon, carbon-14. And he knows that there's going to be plenty of carbon-14 in there. It's going to be well within the limits of error of the technique. And he knows that if he allows it to be tested, he's got a lot of explaining to do. So we got any believers in radiometric dating out there, let me just get you to do one thing. Get this lab to allow their specimen to be dated by radiocarbon. I think people need to have the courage of their convictions, don't you think? Yeah.
Related to the last question, how, geographically speaking, how far away was the Lucy specimen found from those?
Oh, I thought I mentioned in the lecture. It's about 900 miles away. So it's
That's two different things.
Tanzania and Ethiopia.
So we would have had to be a different Africa.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been the Lucy specimen. It would have been another specimen of that species, according to Johansen. In fact, when you find a fossil, especially when you find one as remarkably complete on a relative scale as Lucy is, as the discoverer of this fossil, and as the one that gives it its name, you know, A. afarensis, you then have the right to declare your specimen to be what they call a type specimen, against which all other specimens that claim to be the same species have to be measured against the type specimen. Guess what? Johansen did not declare Lucy to be the type specimen. He found a piece of jawbone near the footprints of Leakey and declared that to be the type specimen, I believe just to get an association of Lucy with the footprint site, because it would have been obvious to declare Lucy as the type specimen for A. afarensis. So the whole field is, whatever it is, it's not science.